Chase Barnett, and this week on American DA Live, we will be discussing the Roderick Blincoe case with Assistant Commonwealth Attorneys Luanna Redcorn and Andrea Mattingly Williams. On September 12, 2009, on Aurora Avenue, just off of Winchester Road, Blincoe entered into the house of Liese Carr and stabbed her to death before fleeing the scene to a local church. Let's join Andrea and Luanna as they discuss the case in detail.
On September 12th of 2009, Miss Carr was at her home on Aurora Avenue. At that point, it was a Saturday afternoon. Several neighbors were working in their yard or working outside on that day. One of the neighbors who lives right next door to Miss Carr saw Mr. Blincoe walk up the driveway. He didn't think much of it because he knew that Mr. Blincoe had lived there in the past, so he just went on working on his mailbox. A few minutes after he saw Mr. Blincoe walk up the driveway towards the back of the house, several neighbors in the neighborhood started to hear what they first described as muffled screams coming from inside the house. They continued to work in their yards or go about their business, but then the screams continued to get louder and louder, and they could tell that it was a woman screaming. And we had several neighbors from the neighborhood testify, and each of the neighbors very distinctly heard a woman screaming, "Help me, help me, he's killing me, call the police." At that point, the neighbors obviously began to become concerned. A couple of the neighbors could hear that the screaming was coming from the back of Miss Carr's house. At that point, they made their way towards the back of the house, and two of the neighbors saw the defendant, Roderick Blincoe, whom they all knew because he had lived there. They did not know his name, but they knew that he was associated with that house, and Miss Carr in the back. One of the neighbors described that Roderick Blincoe was pushing something or shoving something into Miss Carr's stomach, and at that point she continued to scream, "He's killing me, call the police, he's killing me, call the police." Another neighbor heard the screams, pulled into the driveway, saw the defendant holding Miss Carr and appearing to not let her go. At that point, people began to call 911, and one of the neighbors got out of his car and went to Miss Carr. At that point, the defendant ran. He threw something down in the backyard. At that point, they did not know what he had thrown down, and he jumped over a privacy fence in the backyard.
How did the police first learn about the stabbing?
The police learned from a 911 call, and the next door neighbor, Wendy, called the police, and when she was calling the police, she actually went out to give assistance to Miss Carr. And
while she was making the call?
While she was making the call. And Wendy was describing what was happening, what they had seen, what other neighbors had seen, and on the 911 call, you can hear Miss Carr identify Roderick Blincoe as the person that stabbed her.
What do you actually hear?
You can hear her gasping for air. Wendy is trying to comfort her, saying, hang on, it's going to be okay." And at that point, you can hear Miss Carr say very distinctly, "Blincoe." And Wendy follows it up, "Is that the person who hurt you?" And she repeats, "Blincoe."
Right.
So at that point, the police had a name. Miss Carr's friends describe her as a person who loved to experience life. She loved to have experiences. She loved to cook for her friends. She was an artist. She loved to paint, and that was evident when the police went in to search her house. There were painting supplies there in the house. Her friends just really said she loved to experience life.
What was her connection with Roderick Blincoe?
Mr. Blincoe, from time to time, Miss Carr would take on renters in her home to help make ends meet. So she would have what her friends described as working men usually live in the house and rent a bedroom from her. And Mr. Blincoe, after the police found him and began their investigation, discovered that they had a mutual friend. Mr. Blincoe wrote Liese Carr from prison in late 2008, saying I'm about to get parole in January of 2009. Can I rent a room so I can tell my parole officer that I have a place to live when I get out of prison? And
that
she
was
agreed.
That was the first that she met with him?
Yes.
Or knew of him?
Yes.
Okay. And when was that? When did he get out of prison?
He got out of prison in January of 2009.
And went to live with Ms. Liese Carr?
Yes,
Rent
and
a room from her?
He rented a room beginning in January of 2009 from her
how
house.
long? For how long?
Well, he was there until about April when his parole was partially revoked because he got an alcohol intoxication. And then in June of that year, when he was released from jail, he went to live at a halfway house.
So did not go back there and live anymore?
No. She died very quickly from her injury. She died in surgery from basically blood loss. An autopsy was performed on her body in Frankfurt, and she had multiple stab wounds, 3 in the chest area, 1 in the abdomen, and several on her neck.
Blincoe was sentenced to life in prison, but will be up for parole just after 20 years from now. Join us next week on American DA Live as Ray Larson discusses the murder of a 17-year-old boy in Covington, Kentucky.